Last week I read a manga called Teesta by Tetsuya Endo. Teesta is the story of a shy, small, quiet, unimposing young woman who secretly moonlights as a religious vigilante killer, with a pair of supernatural eyes empowering her to gun down targets from impossible distances, until she meets a young man who causes her to question her life, and everything slowly comes tumbling down. At 2 volumes long, Teesta is fairly short for a manga series, and it doesn't seem to have been particularly popular or successful when it came out. I say this because while it isn't hard to find copies for sale online, they're all in Japanese. As far as I can tell, Teesta never got an official English translation. It's kind of a shame because official translations offer certain advantages over fan translations. I know it's popular to talk up fan translations in the manga community, and I may make a video about the subject later, but for now let me just say that sometimes dialogue degenerates to the point where it's hard to tell what people are actually supposed to be saying, and between the 2 fan translations I read, neither of them could seem to decide what the main character's last name is supposed to be. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the work the fan translators did. I can't read moon runes, so this was the only way I could experience this story. And the translators did put some care into certain details, like the footnotes translating the Latin and Greek phrases that appear in the comic. But yeah, fan translations frequently have certain problems that official translations usually don't. It's also hard to justify buying a physical copy, which also has advantages, when I can't actually read it. But enough about that, let's talk about the comic itself. It certainly has some flaws, some of which I'll address in a bit, but there's a lot to like about Teesta. It's not the most shockingly original concept, but it brings just enough of its own unique flavor to the concept to give it a unique identity. All the heavy Catholic religious symbolism actually has an in-story justification instead of just being there for aesthetic. The Gothic architecture with dark shading looks fantastic and striking, and the detailed panels of the New York skyline are further proof that Endo is no slouch as an artist. The people are a little more stylized, going from somewhat more realistic proportions to chibi to everything in between depending on the mood being conveyed. Generally, it conveys the mood of scenes well, but there are times when characters in darker situations are still depicted in a more cartoonish style. I think the intent is to give these scenes a distorted, manic feeling, but other people may find the art style jarring. What really makes or breaks any piece of fictional entertainment, though, is the story. And what makes or breaks Teesta's story is its lead character, because she's very much the central focus of the story. This is not a story with an ensemble cast. There are important secondary characters, but they're all supporting roles, and they have much less, whatever you want to call the comic equivalent of screen time, panel time, than her. Fortunately, Teesta alone is a compelling character, and her emotional journey is the best thing about the manga. The thing that impressed me about Teesta's character arc is that it mostly avoided the cheap tricks that this particular subgenre of anime and manga frequently use. What you've got to understand is that Teesta was made on the tail end of a trend of violent anime and manga series focused on traumatized young women and girls becoming superpowered killers. There have certainly been plenty of examples of this before and since, but in the aughts there was an explosion of successful series centered around this concept. Elfen Lied, Gunslinger Girl, Claymore, and probably a dozen others I can't be bothered to remember right now. Something about the Bush era made anime fans crave stories of cute girls gruesomely slaughtering people, I guess. But by the time Teesta came out, the fad was dying. And as always happens when a fad is dying, there was backlash. Not entirely undeserved backlash, I might add. These series may have seemed like they were deep, edgy, provocative, and emotionally affecting when we were angsty teenagers, but looking at them with a more mature and cynical eye, they were often full of emotional manipulation using the shock of blood-spattered cuties, sexual assault, and other mature topics that provoke a strong primal reaction to cover up for lazy, subpar storytelling and characterization, including the frequent use of copy-pasted stock personalities for these blood-stained waifus. Would you like your violent moe lead in childlike or emotionless robot flavors? People were getting wise to the cliches, and by the time Teesta came out in 2007, a couple years after Gunslinger Girl and Elfin Lied had ended and his Claymore was just finishing up, it was written off as more of the same and tossed aside, even unfavorably compared to earlier series. And it's really a shame because while Teesta has a lot of superficial resemblance to those earlier series, it really is doing something different. It's much more biographical and gives its lead character more depth, and even that rarest trait for this kind of manga and anime, a bit of subtlety. We see Teesta shoot people, but we also see her in her day-to-day life, getting mad about littering, embarrassed when a boy flirts with her, and gently tolerant when being teased by a pack of rowdy children. Later in the series, through flashbacks, we see her rage and desire to stop bad people that led her to go down the path she did. She runs the gamut of emotions. Consequently, she feels very three-dimensional and human. More often than not, this type of series attempts to make the audience simply feel pity for the female lead or leads, and to do this, the rather cheap tactic that I can only call misery porn is used. Just pile on awful thing after awful thing on this character to the point where it seems either fetishistic or comical. Not only would a character be sexually abused, she'd also become homeless, have random people beat her up, and finally have someone torture her puppy who was her only friend to death for no reason while forcing her to watch. At some point it just becomes absurd. Teesta, that's the manga, not the character, actually shows some restraint in this regard, believe it or not. Quite a few terrible things happen, but never to the degree where you feel like 90% of the city's population are monstrous sociopaths who firebomb animal shelters for fun. As a consequence, we have a world that feels more down to earth and a character who's interesting, multi-layered, and makes us feel empathy instead of simply pity. It might be surprising to hear that the violence in Teesta is also fairly restrained. People get shot, and in a couple of instances beaten, but there aren't any massive geysers of blood, no dismemberment, and no lingering on depictions of violence. I would compare the violence in Teesta more to an 80s action movie blended with a noir story than any sort of infamous anime gore fest. The series doesn't rely on fan service either. Teesta's lead dresses about as conservatively as a member of a secret Christian fundamentalist sect probably should. There are a couple of times in the books where someone takes a shower or bath, but they're presented in a very non-sexual way, and you don't see much of anything. If you're looking for TNA, this manga is not the right choice. And I don't mean that as a shame on you for liking fan service or gore thing, but shock and titillation can definitely be a crutch for capturing and holding audience attention without relying on the two legs of characterization and plot. With almost none of the shock and titillation, Teesta has to stand on its own 2 feet. Oh yeah, metaphors. So how well does it stand? Well, I already said I really enjoyed the characterization of the lead and her journey, and the characterization of a lot of the side characters is pretty good too, although none of them get nearly as much focus. The big exception are the villains. I guess that's the best way to describe them. The people Teesta is sent to kill. They're all very one-dimensional. The villains don't get much focus, and they don't really need it, but all of them being so one-dimensional does undermine the message the manga seems to be trying to get across. I'll explain how as I cover the plot. Unfortunately, the plot of Teesta is where it stumbles a bit. It's not broken, it's not completely stupid, it does what it needs to mostly, but it's a bit sloppy. That's the best word to describe it, sloppy. The moral message is muddled, there are several plot threads that go nowhere, and part of the ending doesn't actually make sense if you stop to think about it. Talking about the plot in detail means spoilers, of course, so if you've been watching and you think this looks like something that might be your jam, that you might want to read, and you don't want it spoiled, I recommend stopping the video and looking up the manga. It's not hard to find online. Okay, now I'm going to get into spoilers, and the things I spoil are going to get more and more important as I go along, so you can stop the video at any point and avoid some of the more major spoilers about the ending. The bare bones of Teesta's plot are quite simple. Boy saves girl from being hit by car, boy asks girl on a date, boy doesn't know that girl is secretly an assassin. Girl, by coincidence, is assigned to kill someone boy is associated with. Boy gets caught in the middle and girl saves his life. Boy recognizes girl. Girl runs away. Girl keeps working as an assassin, but her mental and physical state start deteriorating. Boy searches for girl. Law enforcement also searches for girl, with boy accidentally giving them information. Organization girl works for gives her an ultimatum: kill the boy. Final confrontation where everything comes to a head. As I said before, it works fine as a framework. It's not revolutionary, but Teesta's arc is presented in a compelling way, and the cool, dark, religious, gothic imagery makes it fun to look at as well. But the meat on the bones of this story tastes ever so slightly off. Plot threads that go nowhere. Two big ones stand out. First is the death of Teesta's parents. Early on in the manga, we're told they got stabbed to death by a meth head who broke into their house, but later on, the series suggests that Teesta killed them herself, possibly after being abused. Except a detective who worked the case explains that that's impossible, because the two were attacked head-on, which a young child wouldn't be strong enough to do. Teesta does not have any kind of super strength or toughness in this series. The meth head was found several blocks away with their blood all over him, and his fingerprints were on the knife. What really happened is never clarified. Also, the same detective character who worked the case of Teesta's parents' death is also working the case to catch the Vigilante in the present, but this connection also amounts to nothing. He isn't even the law enforcement officer who actually confronts Teesta to arrest her at the manga's ending. So, what was the point of all that? The second plot thread that goes nowhere is Tissy. Tissy is an alter ego of Teesta's that starts appearing to her later in the manga and talking to her. She resembles Teesta when she was a child, but always has the crosshair eyes, distorts her face, and floats around generally being creepy. What Tissy actually wants is kind of vague. She seems to represent Teesta's darker self, encouraging her to use her powers and have a more selfish mindset. But again, nothing really comes from this. It does allow Teesta to have some internal monologues in a more visually interesting way than just using text boxes, which she also does earlier in the manga. But all of the stuff with Tissy could be removed with absolutely no impact on the main story. Both of these elements felt like they were building to something that never came, and it makes me wonder if Endo had bigger plans for the story, but was forced to write the ending prematurely due to the sales not being high enough to continue. Message problems. Teesta, the manga, not the character, wrestles with a difficult moral question. When evil people are causing suffering and the law isn't doing anything about it, is it morally justified for people to go outside the law and take extreme action? Even kill? The answer the manga eventually gives is no. But it's not an answer it really earns. I've already mentioned how everyone Teesta is ordered to kill, with the exception of Artie, is a completely one-dimensional villain. These range from drug dealers, corrupt politicians who show no remorse, to a serial rapist, a child-murdering gang leader, and a Chinese gang that kidnaps children to sell their organs on the black market. A big argument against real-life vigilantism is that just about every terrorist and gang of persecutors in human history has believed they were getting rid of bad people to protect the good people. Here that's not an issue, though. The organization Teesta works for, despite being religious in nature, targets people who can be considered evil in a very universal sense. Regardless of political persuasion or religious denomination, most people strongly despise child abusers, rapists, murderers, and those who use positions of power and trust to exploit the masses. The organization is either a splinter group of the Catholic Church or a secret group operating within the Catholic Church, and modern Catholicism is a fairly moderate religion, regardless of what certain militant anti-theists might tell you. The Pope doesn't exactly go around preaching death to homosexuals and apostates these days. I don't actually have a problem with the organization targeting people who could be considered evil in a broader, more objective sense. Heck, doing otherwise might have caused the organization to lose the level of moral complexity it has, and that's something I really enjoyed about the manga. It would be so easy for a creator to turn this organization into a pack of crazed religious fanatics, but instead you've got a group of people who are very sympathetic, who in their quest to make the world a better place have fallen down the rabbit hole of fanaticism, to varying degrees, but whose larger goals remain something that's easy to empathize with. But the manga takes things to extreme in the other direction. None of the targets have even a glimmer of humanity, and the series makes an excellent case that they need to be stopped by any means necessary. Too bad the cops seem to be completely impotent and incapable when it comes to stopping anyone except for Teesta. It really makes the whole vigilantism bad, law enforcement good message toward the end ring hollow and fall completely flat. Case in point is the entire story of the character Susie. Susie is a girl who becomes Teesta's friend after her parents are killed. Susie is being verbally and physically abused by her father. He beats her, but never on the face to avoid child services, and tells her she's worthless if she can't make him money. Eventually it gets so bad that Susie attempts to commit suicide. An assassin from the organization responds by killing Susie's father. Then, towards the end of the manga, we learn what happened to Susie, and she's actually doing great. She's grown into a happy, well-adjusted young adult. Vigilantism worked! Killing fixed the problem! In fact, based on everything we see in the manga, the only thing keeping the organization from being the good guys is their paranoia and lack of a humane retirement plan. If they moved Teesta to some nice little parish out in the country where she could teach troubled kids like she wants, and lie low till the cops stopped looking for her, there would be absolutely no reason not to root for them. The only argument against vigilantism itself put forward in the manga, besides that it's illegal, is that there will always be more evil people and you'll drive yourself insane trying to kill them all. It's a very black-pilled manga like that. But again, a humane retirement program for these vigilante assassins would go a long way towards fixing that. So yeah, the problem is when it comes to morals, Teesta, the manga, not the character, tells us one thing but shows us something entirely different. It's what TV Tropes calls a broken Aesop. Last major issue I have with the manga. The final arc and ending. Teesta is sent to kill Artie, the guy who she met at the beginning of the manga that kicked off the whole plot, both to silence him because he knows too much, and to prove her loyalty to the organization. Of course, she can't do it, and she even contemplates suicide in a panel that would make a great reaction image for certain news and internet content. But that would be a bit anticlimactic, so there's another assassin on the scene who tries to pressure her to complete the job. Instead, she stops the bullet meant to kill Artie by catching it with her shoulder. And here's the first big problem with the scene. At this point, the second assassin has decided to kill everybody on the scene, and he has them dead to rights. He's on a rooftop looking down at them. Teesta has dropped her gun. Nobody else knows where he is, but for no discernible reason, he doesn't shoot. He lectures for a minute and freaks out again for no discernible reason. Dude, you're a professional assassin. What are you doing? Why are you wasting time? And then he leaves because there's too many po-po. Except he doesn't actually leave, he just moves a few buildings down, and waits to attack Teesta again. Wouldn't it have been safer to just finish them all off quickly in the alley? Now she's had time to plan a counterattack. Not a great plan, I think she might still be on that suicide kick honestly, but it is enough to take the assassin out of commission. This final fight scene is just a mess. The bad guy's actions make no sense, and nothing in it is cool or clever enough to make me forgive the lapses in logic. And after the final fight scene, there's the close of the manga. Emotionally, it's kind of effective. It's very bittersweet, emphasis on bitter. But there's a big plot hole. Teesta goes to prison, and then the organization just decides to leave her and Artie alone. The whole point of the last arc was that Teesta and Artie are extremely dangerous to the organization because they know too much. That's why Teesta was ordered to kill Artie, to eliminate a security breach and prove her loyalty to the organization. Teesta was an assassin for the organization for like 10 years. She knows where they operate, she knows their methods, and even assuming they were using code names, she recognizes a bunch of their faces. She would be a great resource for the police if she's willing to cooperate or cut a deal. How is she not still a huge security threat at the end of the manga? You can't just have a character say she's not, when clearly that's not the case, Endo. This is another thing that makes me wonder if the manga was originally planned to run for longer, and these problems were caused by the ending being rushed. I don't have any proof for that, just a suspicion. Minor comments and criticisms. Teesta's vigilante name. She's called Sister Militia, which is spelled like Sister Militia. Everyone calls her this, not just the organization, but criminals and the police as well, people who have no idea what her true identity is. It's not flat out said in the manga, but it's strongly suggested that Sister Militia is a nickname given to her by outsiders, either the public at large, criminal organizations, or the police. They know she's a woman, and they know she never kills on Sunday, and those are mentioned as being contributing factors towards her nickname. But why would they pronounce it so strangely? Shouldn't it just be Sister Militia? It seems like a much more normal nickname for a vigilante killer. Maybe I'm overthinking it, I don't know. I do love the Sister Militia outfit. The white boots and gloves, black leggings, that long black coat with the white hemming, sunglasses, the black hat with those funny pom-poms. It all creates a look that's very distinctive and instantly recognizable, while still looking fairly practical. The visual design also calls to mind both clerical and special forces uniforms, as well as clothes worn by several school shooters. It's a great example of subtle visual cues that give you a lot of information about a character in a subliminal way, without you even realizing it. Religion. While it is a major theme of the manga, if you're looking for any kind of theological depth here, you're going to be disappointed. It's all pretty generic, punishing evil, promoting self-sacrifice stuff. Endo clearly did a bit of research, or maybe he had some experience with the Catholic Church growing up, and he uses that to include lots of Christian trappings like accurate hymns and prayers, but it's all very surface level. I don't really think it needs to go particularly deep on the subject, but I figured I'd mention it in case you were expecting deep religious themes. Also, the manga seems a bit confused about what Christians believe about the afterlife, although maybe that's somewhat a result of the awkward translation. There's a superhero cartoon in the comic called Blunder Man, and it's clearly supposed to be a parody based on everything we see about it. The main character wears a ski mask, tighty whities, and fishnets, and his alter ego is a loser NEET. But everyone treats it like a serious superhero story, and it's used to draw serious parallels to the main plot. It doesn't really work for me. I don't know why Endo decided to do this. Maybe he felt like he needed to lighten the mood a bit? Fortunately, the Blunderman show is only brought up a couple of times briefly, so it didn't bug me too much. Hollywood Forensics. Teesta, the manga not the character, does that thing you see in TV shows and movies a lot, where forensic investigators can figure out absurdly accurate and comprehensive details about someone by just briefly looking at a crime scene. I actually liked the FBI forensics character, Agent Snow. She acts like a ditzy airhead to get people to let their guard down when she's actually very clever and observant. But whenever she analyzed the crime scenes and went full Sherlock, it made me cringe. It's just kind of ridiculous when she gives a rundown of Teista's height down to the inches and a detailed description of her personal struggles based on some footprints and a couple of shell casings. By contrast, the scenes where she's learning things by just going around questioning people are not only a lot more believable, they're much more interesting and engaging because the reader can actually follow the logic of the scenes and feel suspense about whether she's going to get the information she needs or not. Magic Hollywood Forensics don't do that. The comic never really explains how the supernatural eyes work. Different characters say different things, that it's some kind of weird infection, that it's a miracle. This actually didn't bother me a whole lot because how I interpreted it is that the organization, or the Order of the Sacred Heart, as its true name is revealed to be at the very end, is meddling with a force they don't actually comprehend. I think that fits in pretty well with the rest of the manga, which is full of people trying to provide answers and coming up short. That covers all my thoughts on the manga pretty extensively, I think. Was it worth reading? For me, yes. When the character work is good, it's really good. Yes, the plot is a bit clumsy, but it has a certain sense of gravitas and style that puts it above a lot of your baseline anime and manga schlock. The art is also pretty kino. On top of experimenting a bit with different types of line art and shading and having a lot of cool, detailed gothic scenery, it's drawn in a very dynamic way with characters popping out of their panels and tons of different angles and panel arrangements. It's pretty interesting and pleasing to the eyeballs. If this got turned into an anime, admittedly pretty unlikely at the moment, I'd definitely watch it. For you, well, you can be the judge based on what you've seen here. I'd recommend at least giving it a chance if the premise sounds remotely interesting to you. As I said earlier, it's not hard to find English translations online. I hope you enjoyed this very detailed picking apart of Teesta, the manga, not the character. As always, if you enjoyed the video, give a like. Comment down below if you want to share your thoughts, and subscribe and ring the bell if you want to see more. Also, if you haven't been getting notifications from YouTube, double check you're still subscribed and have the notification bell turned on. YouTube has been pulling all kinds of shenanigans on channels for a while now, and are notoriously bad at recognizing satire. Just be wary. Thanks, and as always, have a great day.
Shot in the dark.